Hello everybody, welcome to number 27. I'm Jack. Now I think you all know that I like an unusual car. And this Mazda, which has a Jaguar V6 engine, is just such one of those cars. I've been wanting to drive a Rocketeer for quite a while, ever since they first came out, because it seems like they really addressed some of the shortcomings of the MX5. And there aren't many, because the MX5 is an absolutely fantastic car. Mark 1, Mark 2s, I love them all. But this is something altogether different. Now before we start and I tell you how it drives and what I think of it, I'm going to pull over in a second and we will talk to Mark, the owner, about why he wanted to get this car.
This is my MX5. I've always thought they're really pretty cars, and if you've ever driven one, you'll know they handle fantastically. So I decided that it needed a bigger motor, and the guys at Rocketeer have been doing that, I think now for about 5 years. It's an expensive conversion, and I wanted to make sure it went into a decent chassis. It was a bit of a mad decision, but I found a car that had done 841 miles. It's got a 292 horsepower motor in it, which is the Jaguar V6 engine in an S-Type. I wanted a 5-speed box that feels better than the 6-speed, and it's a V6 motor. It doesn't really need a 6-speed box. So yeah, lots of options, lots of cost, but the drive is pretty engaging and quite performant.
So it's quite interesting really, the choices that Mark made. If it was me personally, I would probably still opt for the Mark 1. The Mark 2 in isolation is actually quite a good looking car. I don't think they look bad at all. The problem is that you kind of tend to compare it to the Mark 1, which is which is such a perfect design that without the pop-up headlights, this looks a little bit more fussy, a little bit more dumpy, but it's not a bad looking car. Understand why he did it really. I mean, if you're going to go to the extent that he's gone to, the last thing you want is a really rusty, dumpy shell to be investing that kind of money on. Now I think it's my understanding that a sort of basic Rocketeer kit retails for something like around 10,000, but I could be wrong about that. And but it's about that ballpark. And for that you obviously get the engine and the fitting kit. The Jag engine is actually very, very slightly lighter than the iron block 1.8 Mazda, because it's all aluminium. It also, I believe, possibly, I was talking to Mark and he was saying that it looks like it might be slightly more compact in terms of length, so that they were possibly able to get it a bit further back. I read some reviews about this car and I completely expected it to be a much nicer drive in terms of the engine, the torque, all that kind of stuff, but I did think that the front end would be slightly blunted, and even though the weight's supposed to be the same, that it would suffer. And let me tell you, it absolutely has not. It hasn't dulled the handling at all. It's incredible because it drives exactly like an MX5. It has all the poise, the lightness, the crispness. The sound and the torque from that engine transforms it. So it's so, for me, schizophrenic, because it's exactly like an MX5, but it's totally different to an MX5. And you can get the back end to sort of come into play in corners, and it's so progressive, it just moves out, tightens the line. You can't do that in a normal car, not with the same ease as you can with this. And the car feels OEM. If someone had put me in this car and said Mazda has made a V6 version of the MX5, put me in this, I would think, yeah, it feels so well developed. It is really, really good. Now, I guess one of the other pluses of having the second series is that the interior is much nicer than the first. I quite like the chunky switchgear and the simplicity of the first one, but there's no denying that this is really much more pleasant, much better built, much better materials. But really, what this is all about is this. So it revs to 7.7. It's very torquey. You can just leave it in fifth, poodle along, and it's still got plenty of sort of gap and go. Fourth and third though, at these sort of middling speeds, 40, 50, that's kind of where it's at. It's very linear, I guess, as you would expect, but it keeps sort of pulling right up until 7,700 RPM. Very responsive. It makes the whole car feel more grown up. The normal MX5 just feels like a toy. This really doesn't. This engine just lifts it for me to a whole other level. The steering, which as I say is pretty much standard MX5, but it's very progressive. So first turn in, it's sharp, but it's not crazy sharp. But what's really interesting is that once you're in the corner and loaded up and you adjust, it becomes even more lively and even more responsive to that adjustment. Absolutely lovely, so well set up. It's so well balanced between the front end and the back end. And for that I guess you can actually thank Rocketeer for that, because before the balance was there, but it was much harder to exploit. Now with this power, you really can. Interestingly, Mark has opted for a 5-speed version of the box, and that's quite odd really, because there were 6 speeds available with these. But the guys at Rocketeer and Mark himself say that the 5-speed is actually a sweeter box. So rather than go for the 6-speed, especially when you have an engine which has so much more torque than the standard one, and these gearboxes are so bulletproof that they use them apparently unchanged on cars with 400 horsepower. So as Mark said, he didn't use the original box because he wanted to keep that with the original engine, and he bought a second-hand box on eBay for next to nothing, and then asked the guys at Rocketeer, you know, should we rebuild it? Should I be going? No, it's absolutely fine. Use it exactly as it is. It moves around a little bit, but on this kind of bumpy road, it's amazing. It just flattens all the small bumps out. It's almost like it's gliding over them. You can feel the bigger bumps. The suspension is adjustable. So I think it could probably benefit from just a few clicks, and I would do front and back personally, because I think if you adjust to stiffen up the front, it would actually maybe take away some of that crispness. So I'd get both ends sort of stiffened up a bit, but it's still just an amazing chassis, and it still works incredibly well. Thank you all so much for watching. If you have something interesting like this that you want me to... Oh my god, I didn't even tell you. So the engine in the package that Mark got produces about 290 horsepower at the crank. So there's a sort of a custom plenum chamber that was designed by Rocketeer, a few other bits to sort of improve the power, and when you're driving it, it just feels absolutely spot on. To be quite honest, I would probably be happy with the lower power version, which I think is 250 horsepower. I think that would be plenty good enough. Anyway, spectacular car, sounds amazing, drives very well, really love it. Thank you all so much for watching. If you have something interesting that you want me to review, please get in touch. Instagram is the best way. And wow, I love days like this. I just have fun, film it, it's brilliant. See you all soon.